JD Bunkis now joins us, former director of amateur scouting for the Panthers, our prospect analyst here for Sportsnet. What's up, brother? How we doing?
What's up, buddy? I'm doing okay. Yeah, recovering from a long tournament up in Ottawa.
Yeah. I was going to say, I felt bad. I meant to text you last night and remind you to do the show, and then it got a little late, and I was like, I don't know what the feeling is here in terms of our friendship of me sending you a text at midnight, that's when I was like, this is kind of pushing it. This is like everybody, you have a cutoff with most people, right? You're like, midnight for me, it was like 11:45 when I remember. I was like, damn, I didn't text Books at all. I got wrapped up in football and the Leafs game and all this different stuff. But I figure you did a lot of catch-up beers with people in Ottawa.
Yeah, not so much, to be honest. Just trying to wind down. You get to the end of it, and it's such a marathon at the end that it's just, you just want to shut it down, to be honest with you.
Of course.
You're done. You're done. It's been a week, man. It's such an emotional roller coaster, this tournament this year, on balance compared to years in the past, and so many storylines. And I'm not going to lie to you, when Canada gets eliminated like that, the air kind of comes out of the balloon, It doesn't feel the same in the city. And, on Saturday in the semifinals, there was 4,000 empty seats, and, people couldn't even get a dollar on the resale market for the season. Technically it was sold out, but 14,000 people in the building, and, no appetite to get their money back over the market or the secondary market. So it was a thing, that's for sure.
Yeah, nobody's paying to go see Czechia play. And they became
not paying face value, that's for sure.
No, and like the most intriguing fan element of it was seeing people who hated Sikora now, right? Like it was like, he's a faker. We hate him. We're going to go to these games and make signs about how he's a faker. I'm like, that's true Canadian spirit. So let me actually just start with this. Why do you think that it felt so different this year in terms of the angst around the group? Because last year they lost in the quarterfinals, and I don't recall us doing the same thing. So I would guess there's like a compounding factor here, right? You do it twice in a row, first time since 1981, where you lose in the quarterfinals. So that's like a piece of it. I would imagine that best on best looming again is a part of it. The fact that we have been talking about Hockey Canada and the goaltending and kind of going over some of the issues with the program as of late. But this more so than, honestly, I think any time in my life has been just an excoriating experience for Canadian hockey. And I'm curious to get your read on it.
Yeah, I think that last year there was a feeling coming out of pool play that when they lost to Czechia in the quarters, that it was a bad bounce, like off of Bonk and into the net. And yeah, it was a close game, but it didn't feel quite as awful as this one felt. The preparation, certainly when you're on home ice, that definitely factors into it. I mean, you got time change and you got a whole bunch of different factors. And when you host it in Canada, the expectation's even higher if that's possible. I don't really know if that's possible, because they definitely expect to medal and be in the gold medal game every year. And but this time around, especially, the noise around the team coming right out of the selection camp was different compared to years in the past, I found. And a lot of players that didn't make the roster, that people started pointing fingers even before the drop of the first puck, and it carried over into the tournament itself. But I guess I'm going to go on record, and I am on record by saying this, and I don't know that the selection process would have mattered necessarily, because I really do feel like the way that the coaching staff wanted to play the game, the way that they wanted their group to play, I'm not so sure the result would have been any different, to be honest with you, because it was so the way that our coaching staff deployed the roster compared to other teams was, let's just say, eye-opening. I'm trying to be kind here. It was alarming, to be honest with you. We had some of the best, the top scorers in the CHL that were playing, instead of playing their usual. They're not going to play 24 minutes the way they do with their junior team. I get it. But, when you get guys that are, the Gavin McKenna's of the world, whose ice time goes from 22 minutes, 23 minutes playing in this Western Hockey League. He leads the CHL in scoring before the tournament starts, and then you dress him for Team Canada, and he's between 10 and 12 minutes a night. You know, there's a couple of games there. He was like 6 minutes after 2 periods, JD, and you know, goal scorers and point producers, you got to roll them out. They got to get touches. They got to get feel. And I just feel like the way that the game planning was assembled, it wouldn't have mattered. I think the roster was better than the result.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of people have pointed to this, right, where they've gone, hey, how much of the issue here is the coaching staff versus the selection process versus the talent versus the closing of the gap? And this is what has made this one so interesting. And the reason why, you know, I'm still doing it days later and looking at Canada's roster is I feel like I'm trying to separate and figure out how much of this is part of systemic issues with Canada hockey versus just like a bad tournament with some bad coaching decisions where some guys underperformed. And yeah, the team didn't end up obviously coming even close to expectations. I don't think it's unfair for us to be having conversations like the one that, you know, I was having Friday, especially, like I did a lot on about, you know, the rising cost of the sport and the growing frustration with hockey in general that is kind of bleeding into some of the anxieties of the fans that are watching this product. But from this standpoint, like, you know, you mentioned the selection process. I remember talking to you last year about how we have kind of lost our way a little bit in terms of the Canadian style of hockey, right? That part of the rest of the world catching up has also been Canada starting to look a lot more like some of the other nations. And I've had the theory that the disappointment of last year resulted in them trying to construct a roster that did have a little bit more of them trying to reprint that type of Canadian, oh, well, we've got the leaders and the vets and the character and the try-hardness of the years past, and that because they tried to manufacture it, it didn't really work out. Like, it wasn't an actual organic thing. And I'm curious on your read when it comes to that theory, if you think that's, you know, misjudged or misplaced, or whether that's something that did, you know, seep into those guys' minds as they were putting this thing together.
So I'm like you. I've been trying to reflect on the entire process. So let me just say that it's a lot to unpack. But when they broke camp, I really did feel like it was a roster that was going to be able to combine some skill and will, if you understand. Like, I felt like they had the size with Beaudin and Ritchie and Martone that I forecasted that as a potential middle six line that could provide offense and muscle. You know, the old Canadian way where you can wear down your opponent. But that's not how the coaching staff saw, you know, how they wanted to assemble things. They split up all the heaviness, if you will, amongst the group. So the way that they approached it was different than what I thought. So upon reflection, when I look at the way that they did that, I think that that's mismanaged. And the reason I say that is because if you're going to leave some of the skill off the roster that they decided to leave off, like the Misas and the Senecas, and, you know, you could go down the Yakimchuks on the back end. You could go down to Crystal. Andrew Crystal is one that stands out for me from the Western Hockey League. You could go down that. If you're not gonna assemble it the way that you and I, you know, grew up watching it even 10, 15 years ago, you know, where you really impose your heaviness on a roster, you wear them down till they're tapping out, then your skill takes over. If you're not going to do it that way, then I want to do it the other way, which is absolutely load it up with all the skill that we have and challenge our opponent to find a way to defend us, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Like, I want to go the other way, because if you're going to bring them the way you brought them and you're not going to assemble it that way, then we're going to be exposed because we're not as skilled as we maybe could have been. And so that way I wish they would have just, if that was the plan, I wish they would have just loaded up the roster. I would have taken a 5-3 win. Let's look upon it. Like, Carter George was their best player. Yep. I think everybody would agree with that. So the goaltender was your best player. If he lets in 3 and we're challenging our opponents to, you know, against all of our top players to keep the puck out of their net, I don't think we struck any fear in our opponents the way that we played the game and the way that we assembled the roster this year, and that was telling for me. So, you know, I backtracked, and now I'm saying to myself, I wish we just brought all of our skill and challenged them to keep the puck out of their net.
Yeah, well, okay, so, but this is right, and this is why it's been confusing, and this is why it's been difficult, and why I was glad we were doing this on a Monday when, I personally at least had cooled down a bit. Right? Like I think the last text I sent you, I looked at it before I said it was just, I am deeply embarrassed was what I texted you because I was. And so much of it is exactly what you said there at the end, which is like, there just didn't feel like there was any fear to Canada. And I'm watching the Americans last night. I could barely stomach it, but I'm throwing it on. And there's a swagger to that team now that Canada doesn't have. And I know they've gone back to back, and they've won 5 of 7 against Canada, so they're at the peak of what has been a good cycle. But you know the videos that get leaked when they do the USA Hockey song, and you're like, damn, that's cool. That's a cool song. That's a cool chant. It just feels like that has now become so much of their program in general is like a swagger to it, an attitude to it, a cockiness, a brazenness. And I go, damn, that's cool. That's USA Hockey. And for Canada, I don't know what the identity is. And it feels like they're really caught in between these eras trying to figure out how to get to that next step. And yes, okay, so you've got a coaching staff that did not do well with deployment, but you also had a roster that, just like presented that challenge in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely makes sense. And here's part of the challenge. So when you look at the Americans specifically, because I think they're the poster for this, I was reading some things even this morning. People are like, everybody calm down. On balance over the years, Canada, 20 golds, 8, whatever it ends up being. But honestly, over the last number of years, everybody, especially Americans, have been, inching that much closer to what we have been. And they're better than us right now. Let's just call a spade. And the reason they are is because the way that they've assembled their program down there from the grassroots level all the way through, and then they have the continuity with their group that comes through the U17, U18, and then they go off to college and they play for their colleges just like our guys go off to play for CHL teams. But when they come back, they've got this familiarity. I was saying to Sammy the other night, Cosentino, when we were having a bite to eat after one of the games, like, understand that the American team, the Ryan Leonards, the Hagens, the Perreaults, all these guys, by the time they played in the World Juniors together, this is like their 10th international tournament that they played together because they came through the program together. The 17, the 18s, they played in the 4 Nations, the 5 Nations, the Halinkas, some of them, the World Championships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the Canadian kids, they play in the Halinka in the summer, in August, and then they sometimes split them up on the U17 program, and then they might play in the U18s. But my point is that some of these guys have only played, these Canadian kids, maybe 2 or 3 events together, JD. It's a big, big difference, the way the process works.
Yeah, and, I have a buddy of mine who coaches in the GTHL, and he texted me. He's like, some of the grace here has to be that they've gone through COVID, and it's been part of the reason why you're seeing a bit. And I went, well, the Americans went through COVID too. It's... I understand that it was a difficult process for some of this generation, but other nations.
I'm not using any more crutches.
That's what I mean. I was like,
the Russians aren't even here.
Yeah.
The Russians aren't even here.
That's a great point too.
Imagine if the Russians were here. So, it's fine. It's not fun. This sucks. Let's be honest. I'm frustrated like everybody else, but we have to reflect and we have to adjust. And
that's it.
It's time that we do that.
Yeah, and that's why I want to have you on, is because you actually know the development process. You understand these players. You've seen it year over year. This has been, this is your profession. This is your expertise. And so it is very different when someone like me comes on who's like a casual, who's just like checking in every once in a while versus, hearing some of these things from you. And so to dig in, last one, I guess, for me on the coaching, because then I want to try to get into a couple more of those systemic things that we've talked about. Like, you see the Americans coach, and David Carl is now a 2-time NCAA champion, 2-time world junior champion. He's 35 years old. He's being talked about now as a future NHL head coach and someone who's got a future in the sport. And who people are really excited about. And even just watching the way that his players spoke about him when they were asked questions, like, it's quite clear that he was resonating with that group, that he's innovative, that he's connected with the colleges. And Dave Cameron coaches the 67s, but they've got like a 500 record. And I'm still not really sure, like, how did he end up as the coach? Like, how are we in such different positions as the Americans, where it's like a retread guy with like a checkered past when it comes to, results here and also, just popularity in general and track record right now at like the CHL level versus the Americans who are bringing one of the brighter young minds in the sports through the system and having him coach this tournament?
Yeah, curious, absolutely curious. And I think that, again, it goes back to, for me, we just get comfortable. We think that we can roll out the same sort of strategy and potential experience, if you will, and that it might work. But, no, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Dave Cameron, but it is what it is. And when we've had the older style coach, call it the Brent Sutters of the world, those types of guys, their bench presence and the way that the team bought into whatever they're playing. Let me put it this way: Dale Hunter, when he won gold overseas for Team Canada back in the day, Dale Hunter's team, they played an attacking, loose style. Even though we all know what Dale Hunter was as a player, but here in London, it's a highly skilled, roll him over, let him go type of a situation with his top six, especially. This group was just disconnected that way. It wasn't, you had a bunch of race cars in the garage, but you tried to turn them into bicycles, and it doesn't work like that. And, that's where, you talk about David Carl. He allows those guys to play to their strengths. Like, look who scores the game-winning goal. Teddy Stiga, who's an energy guy. I love Teddy Stiga. He's one of my favorite prospects. Like, he's a bulldog. He's not going to be as good as Ryan Leonard, who was the captain of Team of USA, but he's the next wave of that type of player. Like, that's the thing with Team USA. They've got guys waiting on deck. And they just keep rolling them out right now. And, it's curious. I don't know how they got to the decision that it was going to be Dave. But I honestly think that if you're going to go with an old school coach, that you better have two, like Chris Lazary from Saginaw was the one assistant. Then you have Mike Johnson from the other. And that was curious as well, because Mike's the GM in Portland this year. He's not coaching. And you can't tell me you couldn't have surrounded the bench with two really young guys. Lazary, I think he does a hell of a job in Saginaw. But you understand what I'm saying? Like that type of the yin to the yang more. And, I don't know. It just didn't work, man. It was so blatantly obvious that it wasn't working, that they were tight, and the deployment and the strategy. And at the end of the day, I watched Ryan Leonard win the MVP last night, JD, and I'm thinking to myself, like, who was our Ryan Leonard? Like, every time when Canada has success, you have a takeaway, like one or two players, right? Like Jonathan Toews scoring how many goals he scored in the shootout years ago. But that's the thing. We're living in the past. We got to get up to speed here, pal.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And to your bench presence point, like, I'm sorry, but you either have to be like a strategical genius if you're not going to be the bench presence guy, or someone who is young and up and coming and interesting and, has something. And that's the issue I have with the Dave Cameron decision, is like, when looking back on this thing, like, what is it that it's the Office Space line? Like, what is it that you say you do here? Because the deployment's terrible. People are questioning who's playing with who. And, even just like the power play construction, almost down to the letter, decision-making with this group was questioned. They're the only team that's not practicing despite having home ice advantage. And he's talking about them being exhausted without digging into it. He's taken to the podium after they take 1 million penalties, and he's saying, well, we can't really address it. It's just up to the players to do it or not. I'm like, you're the coach. And if you want to talk about bench presence, it's like you talk about Hunter. It's like he's second all time in NHL PIMS. They brought the Sutters to this tournament. They had Pat Quinn at this tournament. Like, there's a pretty stark disparity between the bench presence of those type of guys and what Canada had at this tournament, where it was like Cameron, but feebly calling referees over during, the moments where his team would again take penalties. And it's just like, man, they just didn't look prepared. They didn't look like they were being deployed well. He was overwhelmed at podiums. Like, it was, you're right. He was such a disaster at this tournament that some of the other stuff is harder to figure out, because you can kind of point to that as like, well, this is what's been bad. And I hope anyways that isn't the only thing that Canada adjusts, that they don't just look at this as a coaching issue, that they do try to avoid some of the getting too comfortable as a program, the idea that things are fine, and they do try to address some of the systemic stuff. And so that's where I want to go now, which is, what is your biggest fear with where Canada hockey is today?
Well, first of all, on balance, you kind of addressed it at the beginning, talking about, on Friday, your show, you're talking about it's an elitist sport, because it is. Yeah, it's very expensive. It's very expensive to play. My thing with the makeup of hockey in Canada, period, and I'm not even just talking when it gets to the World Junior level, is that my observation in the last several years is that we don't have enough bad days anymore with our Canadian kids. And what I mean by that is that we coddle our kids. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We coddle our kids. So when the chips are down and when things are really hard, we tend to come up with more excuses in the process nowadays than we do reflecting on what we could have done better and how we could have got a better result based on, our skill set, our ability at that time. And, you talk about your friend who's a coach in the GTHL. I've done some work with some teams in the GTHL. They've reached out to me independently to get some observations on their players. And nobody wants to hear – anytime you bring up a negative, this is the best way I can put it. Anytime you bring up a negative with a Canadian hockey player anymore, and then you back it up with 10 positives, their takeaway from that conversation, JD, is the one negative.
Yep.
Okay? Now, a kid in Czechia, a kid in Slovakia, even these Americans who are a bunch of bulldogs, I'm going to tell you something. They're taking the challenge of the negative head on. Like it resonates differently with them. And I'm not looking for an easy out here. This is a fact. So we need to get back to having to earn what we think we deserve, but you don't. Right now they think they deserve it, but they don't, because the work and the structure and the not enough bad days to learn to overcome, it hasn't been it's not embedded in them enough anymore, and we have to get back to that.
Listen, I love that answer. Did you see Brad Marchand talk about Team Canada's loss?
I did not, no.
Okay, it was great because he just said, he was like, hey, yeah, it's tough on them, but that's also comes with like the pressure of getting to wear that sweater, right? And you go, yeah, that's what it's supposed to mean, is like you carry the weight of Canada's incredible track record, their culture, their history, all these different things, right? That is what it's supposed to mean for playing for Canada. And I think what's happened in part, but I can't quite put it down to just this, because it is like the Canadian young players are going to deal with more from a social media standpoint because it's popular in this country, right? Like the Americans lose in a tournament and their kids aren't going to get flamed on social media and have, adults in their mentions crushing 17-year-olds. Like it's just not going to happen with the same frequency. And so I think that there is a coddling level with some of this. Like you're talking about even beyond that, like you're talking about them playing, when no one actually is even seeing it. And I think that some of that actually does have to do with, wealth disparity. Or you're talking about you're not having a lot of kids from a lot of different backgrounds playing a different sport. And so you don't end up with a wide variety of approach and style and all these different things. But the coddling thing, I really felt it this time around with the loss, because everyone's like, and I wouldn't say, I'm doing it too, where I qualify everything being like, obviously you don't want to criticize the kids. You don't want to do the kids. It's like, yeah, no one wants to see 16, 17, 18-year-old kids get messaged on social media by adults who are sending them threats and awful messages that are going to, be really awful and really impactful to them. But I also don't think we should conflate that with being critical of someone and hearing it from their coaches and their actual support system, right? Like me, I'm not like, who cares what I have to say? I'm not going to be super critical of these guys. Again, I'm a passenger. I'm checking in from time to time. But the underlying layer, we shouldn't be conflating the social media criticism that they're getting, which is awful, with the actual hard-hitting criticism of coaches and what their development community is supposed to be like.
Yeah, so the social media aspect of it, that's an unfortunate byproduct of society today, period. Like, full stop. I'm not just talking about sport. I'm just talking in general.
Yeah, of course.
Kids hide behind social media. The problem that I have when it gets to this level, and this is how, there's two ways you can look at it. You have the invested fan who's genuinely disappointed and concerned about the direction of Hockey Canada as a whole, or, the results that we're getting. Then you got the idiot adult who's sitting there throwing rocks at a teenage kid, and he's hiding behind social media. He or she's hiding behind social media. Well, shame on them for that. That's a load. That's not fair. That's not the way it should be. But let's not mask the reality, because we can't change that, JD. That's the society we live in today. The reality is that's not going to change. It's always going to be there as we know it. I don't know if it can get worse. Maybe it can, because 10 years ago, you and I would have sat here and thought that would never be as bad as it is today on social media. So that might even get worse. I have no idea. But here's the thing. The process has to be better. It has to be better, and it has to start at the grassroots level. And again, my oldest boy went on a baseball scholarship to the States. Okay, and when he was going through the process up here at an elite level of baseball, he'd sometimes get in the car and he'd say, I deserve to bat this spot in the lineup, or I should have had this and I should have that. And I'm looking at him and I'm saying to him, yeah, but pal, you booted that one at third when that extended the inning, and your pitcher was having a hell of a game, and we gave up 3 unearned runs and we lost the game by a run. I'm paraphrasing here, but you understand?
Yeah.
The message has to be that your contribution resulted in this. We need it to be better next time. So for the good of the group, we can all move forward. We don't do enough of that in sport in Canada, and specifically hockey. I'm here to tell you, it's a wake-up call. They need it.
Dude,
they need it. And I'm not talking about being mean with the wake-up call.
Nope.
I'm talking about structured, analytical, and you know what? When you deserve the pat on the back, I'm going to give you that too.
Yeah.
But we don't have enough bad days, JD, and it's raising to the top of the game now. And then you expect more on the world stage, and you don't get it, and you ask yourself why.
Yeah, well, I think that there is a real fear of reprisal from a lot of these coaches, where they're like, well, what's the juice? Is the juice worth the squeeze on this? Like, am I going to coach a certain way when I might end up in an article? And it's like, yeah, what is, like, trying to find that new line is something that I think everybody's dealing with in, like, a lot of different workspaces. But to me, it's like, it's pretty clear, because the line, to me, the discussion about it is like, it actually hasn't changed all that much. Like, I remember being coached in high school and having the ones that were great were the ones that felt like they were accountable, that would be able to tell you something and get on message, but have a reason for it and not just feel like they were kind of out to get you or being unnecessarily cruel, or an adult having sort of, like a vendetta against you or whatever. But, when you're that age, you don't know anything. Like, you certainly don't know your actual place generally amongst, like, the group and what is required of you. And everybody at that age, usually, especially when you're talented, thinks that they're the best. And so you need hard coaching. Like, you need the type of person that can give you that type of perspective that you hope gets through. And if it does, you're going to end up seeing a kid flourish. And so, yeah, coaching at every level right now pretty clearly needs to be reevaluated. I think that it's got to be a huge priority for Team Canada moving forward. And that kind of brings me to the optimistic part of this segment, which is, do you think that, like, where's your level of optimism that this can now turn into a good thing for Canada hockey, rather than just us continuing to see more tripling, quadrupling down on the same issues?
Lukewarm, to be honest with you. Yeah. And the reason is because I didn't see enough ownership in the news conference cycle at the end of the tournament. I heard a lot of apologies and, reflection and whatever, but what I also heard was that we felt like we wanted to build a team this way, and we built a good enough team to play a certain way, and it didn't work this time. And the excuse is that we had some puck luck that didn't go our way, or we got goalie. Mm-hmm. Listen, we had Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan had a better shooting percentage and got to the inside to score goals more than Team Canada. Let that sink in for a second. Kazakhstan, who got relegated. So I don't know. Until you start they need an influx of more outside the box thinking, some new breed thinking. Scott Salmon, I have to be fair, Hockey Canada has gone through some things, self-inflicted wounds, and we're not going to go there. But the trickle-down effect of that has been less to work with staffing-wise, mm-hmm. and that's a challenge. So that makes it even more imperative as a leader of an organization. When you're challenged that way, you better get it right when you pick your personnel, I would say. So there's a lot of moving parts there, so that's why I'm lukewarm on it. I'm not going to be losing my mind over the process in the next 6-7 months, but I am looking for change. Yeah, I think everybody, most people are. Again, this is a conversation for rational, level-headed people that, you look at this and there are a various amount of layers to it. But it's just like anything. When you try to put it down to one problem, like if you just say, oh, this was a coaching problem, you're not going to end up with a better result. If you just say, oh, this was a roster construction problem, you're not going to end up with a better result. And so to me, it's like anything. The only way to actually move forward and to get better is to have accountability. Like, I preach this to my young producers all the time. I'm just like,
You can't get defensive about something. You can't just immediately be like, well, it's just because this happened. It's like, no, there's layers to why this is happening. Evaluate what the process is. And then once you actually start to do that, that's when you start to get better and that's when you start to improve. Like, where does that not apply? So clearly it has to apply here where there are clearly so many problems.
Well, you got to start with the micro, though, right? Like
Yeah.
if you go to the macro right away and you look at the landscape, so you got to start at the top of the pyramid and say, okay, as a leader of the organization, what can I do better, and where could I have made a better decision, or who didn't I listen to in the process, or can I bring in somebody that thinks a little bit more outside the box? Like, you have to do that at the top, and then there's going to be a trickle-down effect from there when you're running a big organization like Hockey Canada, and that's part of the reset. The challenge, again, is that you have to check your ego and your stubbornness at the door. You're going to have to take a few pot shots along the way and accept those as an opportunity to get better. And people who have been in the game and done it a certain way for so long, even the Scott Sams of the world who's been at Hockey Canada forever, and he's taken on this huge challenge, sometimes they resist that. And I'm not saying that he's going to. All I'm saying is that everybody better be open-minded. You shouldn't be making excuses. This is an opportunity to make change, make positive change, be the leader that you're paid to be, and go from there. And but you have to start on the micro, JD, because if you start trying to do everything, you're going to do it 50% well, and it's never going to get any better.
Yeah, I'm with you. But honestly, this is why I'm going to keep having conversations like this, and it's why it's going to keep staying like a staple of the show in the foreseeable future, because like I really care about the sport. I know what it means to this country. I know what it means to people individually. And yeah, this is a biggie, and there's a lot to it. Before you go, I do want to ask you just about, you mentioned how like no one really ended up, I think, improving their stock on Canada. Like, I don't know who that would be. Like you said, like the standout. Who's the guy other than maybe George, where you said, oh, all right. Like
Matthew Schaefer for a period in
well, yeah,
3 minutes.
for sure. Yeah, actually, that's the correct take is before Schaefer got hurt, he was clearly the standout for this team. And it was funny because McKee last night, he's like, how did we beat Finland when they're they're this good and they'd gone through the tournament? That's the game they had Schaefer.
So can I say something to your listeners here about Matthew Schaefer? And this is outside of the skill set and everything else. This is an individual. I talk about hard days that lost his mom to cancer last year. He also lost his landlady in Erie who passed away, and then he comes here and suffers this injury. This kid, and he started the year with mono, JD. So even before he got to the World Juniors, he had suffered some catastrophic, situations off the ice. And then you saw what he was capable of at the World Juniors. That is an example of overcoming and persevering. It's too bad that he has this setback, but that's what I'm trying to say going forward. Those are the types of people that I'm looking for.
So, yeah, and I think that it's pretty clear that he is going to be at the very top of everybody's draft boards. But I'm curious on you and I went into this like, hey, what is this tournament going to look like for Easton Cowan? It's a huge one for him. He's the Leafs' top prospect. And yeah, he scored a goal in the very first game of the tournament and then was silent the rest of it. And some really tough moments when it came to some bad penalties, some missed opportunities in terms of, some playmaking or some finishing in this tournament. And I'm curious, how, again, someone who evaluates these guys is evaluating his play at the tournament and how it's going to kind of impact the way that you're looking at the way he plays the junior level moving forward.
Okay, so there was some noise at the end of the tournament that he wasn't healthy. He was still battling injury. From a scouting perspective on a high leverage stage like the World Juniors, if I go to the tournament, and especially with the amount of personnel Team Canada has to choose from, if I see the kid dressed, I can only assume he's at the best of his ability.
Very high percentage, yeah.
Okay, so that's my first assumption. So if that's my immediate takeaway out of the box, then the rest of it is it wasn't good enough, and he would admit that as well. He did at times play with the tenacity and the spunk that's required. It's hard to see it all on TV. Like when you're in the venue, you see a lot of other things. But my other takeaway is this: his shift length is far too long. And when you get into high leverage situations where it's tracking or it's physical or you have to be exceptionally detailed, things happened that I believe like there were shifts that he was on the ice 12, 13 seconds longer than his line mates. Okay. So his in-game management wasn't great. and then the trickle down effect for the rest of the bench when one guy stays out there too long like that is consequential. So he was just average. Again, he was just average. Now, here's the other thing, though. Fraser Minton a year ago was below average for Team Canada and put in the work. So Cowan's got some habits that he's got to break. He's got to, he's got some things that he's got to get back to playing to the identity that he played with the year that he got drafted, the second half of that year, which was a relentless competitor that gave him more opportunities skill-wise. Don't rely on skill and lose the will is what I'm trying to say. And that's my takeaway right now. He's relying too much on the skill, and he's hoping for plays to happen. And it doesn't work like that when you get to pro hockey.
Books, I always appreciate getting the perspective, especially this morning when I forgot to remind you, and you could have easily forgotten. Thanks for doing this, man.
I got you, buddy. Yeah. Anytime. Thanks for all the entertaining texts at the tournament. It was awesome. Thank you very much.
That's one way of putting it. That's a kind way to put it. Jason Bukala, former director of amateur scouting for the Panthers, and our prospect analyst for Sportsnet.